Welcome to Full PreFrontal, the show that exposes the mysteries of executive functions. This show is a collection of conversations about the role of the prefrontal cortex, which impacts your focus, planning, problem-solving, emotional balance, and independence. These conversations will introduce mental tools that will empower you to shift your mindset for a successful life. And now, here's your host, Sucheta Kamath.
All right, welcome back to Full PreFrontal, where we are exposing the mysteries of executive function. I am here again with our host, Sucheta Kamath. Good morning, Sucheta. So today is your second conversation with MaryAnn Brittingham. I'm looking forward to that. But we'll lead off the conversation by asking you a question. Do all nightmares about substitute teachers come true?
Funny you ask, Todd. And I do have one horror story to share. And I hate to kind of lead our podcast with this, but it was kind of interesting to me. You know, this is just literally a few weeks old. So on July 20th, when the Southside Elementary School in Buffalo, New York, opened its doors, no one expected it to be anything but a run-of-the-mill day. You know, the student enrolled in the summer program strolled into the classrooms to resume their summer activities until the 911 call was made. It turns out that the substitute teacher, Mr. Mark McGavern, threw a table at an eighth grade boy and charged towards him and went to repeatedly punch him in the face and finally attempted to choke him. Of course, all this went down in front of 20 other students who became accidental bystanders. Investigations suggested that it started with the eighth grader boy who threw the chair at the teacher. So apparently the student felt unsafe and took the measure of throwing the chair as a self-protection step. So the authorities arrested Mr. McGavern and he was immediately fired. So we all agree that this is not a safe and learning environment for anyone. You know, Epictetus from 1st century AD said that people are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of them. The incidents may spark a debate whether it is okay for a teacher to throw a table because the student threw the chair at him and was the first, since the student was the first to instigate this encounter, can the two teachers say he started it? But I feel the plight. I feel my heart goes out for the substitute teacher as much as for the eighth grader. But my previous guest, Nancy Rappaport, talked about that bad behaviors are symptoms of something deeper. And I'm curious why the student felt the need to throw the chair. And was it possible to calm the student down and give him a sense of safety? And could the adult in the room provide the eighth grader another way to handle his own emotionally charged feelings in that situation? So I feel the teacher failed the student, and the student, I don't think, failed the teachers. The student just didn't know his own self. And I see this as a lack of skill rather than malice. Well, that's what we are going to find out today from MaryAnn Brittingham, who is my guest, who comes back for the second time. And she's going to talk to us about teachers' role in dealing with challenging and disruptive students. Let me review a little bit about MaryAnn's background. You know, MaryAnn has a master's degree in family counseling and bachelor's degree with dual certification in both special and general education. She's the author of Respectful Discipline, Motivating the Unmotivated, Dealing with Difficult Parents, and also she has co-authored a very informative and amazing book that's called Transformative Teaching, Changing Today's Classrooms Culturally, Academically, and Emotionally. Throughout her 35 years in education, she's worked as a special ed teacher, adjunct instructor at the graduate level, teacher consultant, and has provided counseling to children and families. You know, MaryAnn, a behavior consultant and well-known international speaker, focuses on social and emotional skill development, effective classroom management, and discipline and self-regulation and mindful practices. MaryAnn is wholeheartedly committed to helping teachers reflect on and transform their own behavior in order to better serve their students. This passion was the springboard that has led her to create her own international business, Brittingham Professional Development Seminars. And we'll have a link to her website, and she offers amazing workshops, so people should just check it out. So I'm ready to talk to MaryAnn Brittingham today.
Well, I learned an awful lot from MaryAnn last week, so I have no doubt that we will have another great conversation today. And frankly, I have to be honest, any episode that kicks off with one of the great Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, I have to imagine is going to be a great episode. So let's get to it. Here is Sucheta's second conversation with MaryAnn Brittingham.
MaryAnn, welcome to the podcast Full PreFrontal. I'm so delighted to have you again this time. And we are going to talk about some strategies. Everybody's looking for strategies. So disengaged, unmotivated, and disconnected kids don't learn even if we push them, punish them, or even ignore them. Sometimes rewarding them may be an option that is pursued by some people, but that's really not even going to work. So my question to you is, you have written several books, and one of them is Transformative Teaching. I would love to hear what your take is on effective strategies for educators. Can you start us off with what were your ideas behind these global strategies that you call transformative strategies?
Sure. So, well, I do want to just quickly address the rewards. They're not necessarily effective, and yet that's what we always go to. That's our fallback, because that's what's always been. And what we find is rewards and consequences don't really work for most kids. It's not that they don't work at all. They have their place for certain types of kids, like kids with autism. They're very effective. But Daniel Pink does a lot of research on this, and he takes it a step further. I mean, so does Alfie Cohen and Edward Deci. They talk about how the more we reward kids, the more we kill motivation. And yet that's all we've been using, and we're seeing more and more unmotivated students. Daniel Pink says you can use rewards, but you use them for things like rote learning, memorizing multiplication tables, a periodical chart, staying on an assembly line. But if you want a student to do creative writing, creative problem solving, and you reward them, you actually hurt the motivation. So incentive programs can work, but they have side effects, like we're raising more externally motivated kids than internally. Like, how many times have you heard, Cicada, that, oh, what do I get if I do it, right? So they're working for the outside reward rather than the internal reward. And the other thing that we forget with working with students who are unmotivated is that fear is greater than any consequence or reward that you have. So let's pretend that you have a fear of snakes, right? And a really big fear. So if I tell you, stay in the room and we'll have, I'm going to take my snake out. It's a really friendly snake. It's a pet snake. It's never bitten anyone. Would you stay in the room? Probably not, right? You're going to believe. And even if I said to you, oh, no, I'm going to give you bonus points if you stay in the room, and you really want bonus points, but your fear is greater than that. If I say, if you leave the room, I'm going to send you to the office, well, your fear is greater than the consequence I have. And so what rewards and consequences aren't dealing with is really what's underneath the behavior, the fear of doing that. So some of the suggestions that I have, one is in our buildings to start creating a community of educators. If I'm telling you that it takes a long time to change behavior, we have to start working together rather than in isolation. So if I get a student and it takes me a year to get them out from underneath the table and to show up prepared, then I need you to pick up where I left off instead of just doing your own thing. Because very often we work in isolation rather than building upon the skills that we see with kids' behavior. The other suggestion I would have is to remember which most teachers know, but we forget when we get caught up in the demands put on us, is that relationship is the key to changing behavior. When I have a relationship for you, when I feel connected to you, I work harder for you. And when you have expectations of me, I want to work to fulfill those. Dr. Comer says that no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. So that's where we want to start. When students have a sense of safety and security, and have a close relationship, it provides them with that steady footing to support them through all their developmental stages. There was one study done, I think it was at the University of Virginia, where they showed that students who had relationships with their teacher, they don't produce gains in achievement, but they are more apt to achieve gains because of the relationships they have. So I like to, are you familiar with Stephen Covey's work with emotional bank accounts?
Yes. But share that with our listeners. It's a great reference here.
Yeah. So he says that we all have emotional bank accounts, and we need to have deposits made in order to make a withdrawal. And every time we're asking a child to do an activity, we're making a withdrawal. Well, many of them are coming to schools without any deposits made. So when you ask them to do something, you're not getting anything. And, in my book, there's lots of ideas for different deposits, but just simple things like celebrating or acknowledging their birthdays, stopping by for a few minutes to watch them at a sporting event, writing encouraging comments on a paper. So if a student failed, we put like a big F and say, careless work, you couldn't have studied. Well, doesn't the F already say that? So why put more salt in the wound? Why not say, love the new haircut, how's the new dog? Well, what about the F? Well, it's not going anywhere. So in a few days, you could say to the student, noticed you're struggling with this. Here's what we do when we're struggling. We can ask for extra help, stay after, get a tutor, and then offer them suggestions in that way. So simple things that you can do, having lunch with a student, calling after a bad day just to encourage them that tomorrow can be better. So everyone knows different ways that I'm sure many people do this automatically and naturally, but I think sometimes we have to make a more conscious effort. Like when you see them in the hallway, instead of stopping, where were you in class? Just smiling, saying, so glad you're here. I was worried when I didn't see you in class. More of a caring action. Another suggestion that I have in helping students with apathy is building on small steps. I think because we have an expectation, and most students in our buildings will reach that expectation, we are not willing to break down the steps even smaller for the students who need that. So maybe I'm going to say to a student, do any 5 problems on a page and then take a 5-minute break. Do the evens and not the odds right now. Work for 10 minutes and then take a break. And often, as a special educator, when I offer that to a teacher in the gen ed population, they'll say, what about everybody else? They had to finish the whole page. How come this kid doesn't do it? Because the kid's doing nothing. 5 problems is going in the right direction, right? So it's 5 is better than 0. And the whole idea is to build that momentum of success. My husband and I used to have this rule. No matter how tired you are when you come home, you have to go on the treadmill for 5 minutes because you'll be tired and you're like, oh, I'm too tired to work out. So no matter what, you have to do 5 minutes. Well, when you get on the treadmill for 5 minutes, what happens?
You're going to do more.
Yeah, you're going to do a little more. Now, you might not go as fast as you normally did. You might not do as long, but are the few minutes you do better than nothing? Yes. And so it builds up that momentum of success. It keeps you going. So that's the idea of chunking, breaking it down into smaller chunks to build up that momentum of success. Another suggestion, is giving them a place to shine, like where they can feel like they're needed and they have something to offer. Because very often what happens is, you're in my class, let's say it's my science class, and you don't shine. So you start believing that you're not good. I start believing that you don't have much to offer. So find a place where I do shine and let me help other people. Nothing, when there's a fire or a tornado, we feel so good about ourselves when we go and volunteer and help. We need to give kids who are unmotivated and with apathy that place to go help other people. So I have a student in one of my elementary classes who wasn't doing any work at all, refusing, very aggressive behavior. I was lucky that I had a preschool class next door that year, and I would let him go every day before lunch to help those preschool kids put on their snow pants and snow boots. And it wasn't conditional on whether or not he did work. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we make with kids who are unmotivated is everything is conditional. If you do this, I'll give you that. Well, when somebody's in a depression, when somebody doesn't have trust, it's I have to give and then I get. But that's not what's being taught in college. What's being taught is you give me this, then I'll give you that. So I'm let's just call this boy Calvin, letting him go over every day. And I'm getting lots of pushback from other educators. All the other kids are doing their work. How come they don't get to help the preschool kids? Why does he get this privilege? Because he needs it. And the rule in my class is you get what you need, not always what you want. The other kids want it. Calvin needs it. So Calvin comes back and we're walking down the hallway. This is a few weeks after doing it. And we see the preschool kids in the hallway and they see Calvin and they're like, oh, there's our teacher, Mr. Calvin. Hi, Mr. Calvin. It's like the first time all year I saw him smile. He had an importance. He had something to offer. So then he asked if he could go back after recess to help the kids take off their snow pants and snow boots. And I allowed him without any conditions. See, and I'm not asking anything from him yet. And then he comes back one day with a book and he said, could you teach me to read this? Because the teacher said if I could read this book, then I could stay after recess and help them. And that's when Calvin started to care about academics. That's when he started doing reading. So one suggestion is be willing to give and give without always expecting back right away. Give them a place to shine. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Oh, so
That.
sounds like such a spiritual approach. To me, this is nothing but bringing out better self to the table and offering more than getting something in return, and just believing in true potential in children and not writing people off, or not particularly walking away after putting some effort, not if not all effort, and doing it again the next day. So I have a question. Let me give you an example of a kid that I worked with. One of his challenges is got significant executive dysfunction, and his difficulty is writing. And you give him an assignment to write, and he freezes up. He will sit, stare at that paper or stare at that computer screen, and he wouldn't budge. And amount of motivational, encouragement you give him, or applaud for all the good things he's capable of doing outside writing, or how much he knows about writing, none of that happens to have any impact. And when he's with his teacher, who kind of is tired of this, zero production. And then, of course, you can imagine what happens next is this becomes a homework assignment. And so now this becomes something, a disaster at home, because he's doing the same staring, kicking, pushing, but he genuinely has difficulty organizing his thoughts. And how would you recommend, or what will your suggestions be to the teacher who is handling this kid in the classroom?
Oh, that's a challenge. And here's why. You know the child has the skills you've been teaching him. You know he's probably capable. So it goes back to what I said earlier, is what's really behind the behavior. And it's fear. It's fear that I'm not going to do it right. I'm not going to do it well. I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to get yelled at. And that goes to the best way that I could help that student or that teacher is to teach them about fixed and growth mindsets, which I know that you're familiar with Carol Dweck's work on that, right?
Absolutely.
So for those of you, and I'm sure most people are, but just briefly, a fixed mindset is when you believe that your intelligence is carved in stone and I'm not good at this and I'll never be good at this. And a growth mindset means that I can always grow and change my behavior. So that poor little boy has this belief, for whatever reason, that he's not capable. And was it originally because he had a disability with it, or it was just a struggle for him at one point?
No, he does have dysgraphia. He has some language-based learning delay, and then he has ADHD. So he has had a lot of difficulties, which culminated in his difficulty in organizing thoughts, organizing the narrative, creating some sequence, and then expanding upon a language to create this writing. And particularly if it's free response, it's even much harder. Like, tell me what you did this weekend, or tell what you have planned for the summer. Disaster. Okay. That's just very difficult.
And now, being that I don't have that disability, it's hard for me to understand why he can't just learn it and get over it. So that's one thing. So where's the empathy part? The patience, which is the practice that he's going to need over and over. The safety in the environment, that if he does try and make some mistake, that I'm not going to be humiliated or embarrassed. So we have to make sure those foundations are in place. And the next is the mindset about it. What's stopping him, even though he might now have skills to overcome the disability, is he doesn't have the mindset. And when I say mindset, I want to be careful here, because Carol Dweck has been worried that people are thinking, if I just think I could do it, then I'm not going to have any problem. And it's not just positive thinking. It's about believing that I have talents and abilities that can be developed if I'm willing to put in the effort. And that's what's missing. And you know why I feel growth mindsets are so important is because every human being, teachers and students, experience challenges, setbacks, and criticism. And Sucheta, where in our life have we been taught how to deal with those three things? No, one of the few places is sports. That's one of the few places I can think of.
You're right.
Unless you had parents who modeled for you how to deal with challenges, setbacks, and criticism, you don't know what to do. So then you go internal and you put yourself down, and then you become fearful of trying something. So no one's teaching us how to deal with these challenges and setbacks and criticisms. And the other thing that's not being taught is that effort and failure are part of the equation until mastery occurs. Teachers need to remember that when they're working with students, you're going to have to put in a lot of effort. A lot of failure is going to occur until you eventually reach that kid. And students need to be taught that. But because our society, all we see and celebrate is the outcome, right? The movie star, but how many movies or how many interviews did they go on before they got a part? How many songs did they send out in rejection letters before they see it? but all we see is the success. And so kids aren't willing to put in the effort and failure. So one of the things I would love for us to embrace is the idea of struggle time, that no matter what we're going to do, we're going to struggle in it first. But for some reason, no one wants to be in the struggle. And I often have educators say to me, well, MaryAnn, can't you come up with a better word? Struggle time is so negative. It is what it is. We have to, everything is hard before it's easy, right? Everyone would agree with me on that. Well, why do we think that if I had this negative mindset for so many years about my ability, that you just telling me that I can do it and giving me stickers is going to change that? I have to feel safe. I have to trust you, and I have to be able to try it a number of times before I'm going to trust you. So one of the things I like to ask teachers to do is have their students write down everything that they couldn't do from the time they were born that they can do now. You didn't know how to walk. You didn't know how to feed yourself. You didn't know how to tie your shoes. How come you are able to do that now? Well, you put in effort, and you failed many times, but you kept on trying until you got it.
I love it.
Right? And that's what we have to get. Thank goodness we're born really with a growth mindset. When you look at babies, they have a growth mindset. They fall down how many times? Hundreds of times. If they had a fixed mindset, they'd be like, oh, whoa, this walking thing's not for me, right? And everyone would be crawling. But we don't have that. They keep trying. So we got to get them to see that they have to be willing to do it. My colleague, Kathleen Kriza, created this formula, and it's mindsets plus skill sets equal results. And I think that summarizes up exactly what we need to do. So she says mindsets, you have to have the right mindset, but mindsets are not enough. You have to have skills to back up that mindset, and that's how you get the results. And I think what's happening with Carol Dweck's stuff, and we've seen some articles about it, is people are thinking it's just about the mindset. We need to have both. And by the way, having a skill set's not enough. We have lots of kids who have skills, but they don't believe in themselves. And don't you know people like that who you say, oh, you have so much more potential, and they don't do anything with it, right?
And so if I may ask one ingredient to that formula, which is mindset plus skill set plus insight, that self-awareness has to be there. That will kind of polish the results, I feel. Because I think the skills, as you mentioned, there's something inevitable about moving from crawling to standing, then standing to walking. And of course, not a lot of awareness went into it, but it was something as a reaction to falling, you stood up, and reaction to falling, you stood up and did it again. I think once the child becomes more cognizant and there is more self-awareness, there is a lot of fears and self-inhibition about taking risk, and risk aversion kicks in. And then you create this image of being perfect student, which you're not. So when I start my training, I always say the first rule here is you are a student. You are a student. Do you know what that means? By definition, you don't know enough. So if you don't know enough, how can you be a master of something, But you're saying some amazing, amazing thoughts.
So, Sucheta, I love the idea that you want to add insights into that formula. So where would you put it in? Would you put insight before, insight plus mindset plus skill set, or after?
So, it's a compound equation. So, so mindset plus skill set multiplied by insight. So you need the insight even to regulate the mindset, and you need insight to regulate your skill set that you're developing, because you need to know where you would actually apply the skills that you're learning. And you need to know when you are coming from a negative mindset or, like a closed mindset and not a growth mindset. So there has to be there's some supervisory behaviors that go into insight. And so it is kind of looking over all the skills and a mindset that you bring to the table.
Okay, great. I love the idea of adding that in. So thank you for sharing that. And can I add in two last thoughts, whether you want to do it before or after? Okay. So one, I'd like to leave everybody, parents and teachers, with this idea. The greatest gift you can give to anyone is to believe in them when they're at their worst, when they're struggling. And that's a great gift, because that's what helps them get through the struggle. And the last thing is, the only way that you can get another human being to adjust their behavior is first to adjust your own behavior, to first self-reflect and see what you can do to better help them.
Well, thank you for being here, and your zeal for teaching the teachers and compassion that you have for the learners who are going through difficulties is mesmerizing. And I really appreciate all the wealth of knowledge you shared with us. And I will plug in some of the incredible writing that you have and some books that you have co-authored. So thank you, MaryAnn, for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me today. It was such a pleasure talking with you.
So that was MaryAnn Brittingham, our second conversation with MaryAnn. Wow, yet another very impactful conversation, Sucheta, no doubt about it. Gosh, so where to begin? So I guess we'll lead off with this. So any initial thoughts about how, I guess, teaching methods can be teacher-centric?
Oh, yeah. Nice question, Todd. Thank you for asking that. MaryAnn gave me a lot of wonderful insights into shifting the focus from student to teacher. Students with learning challenges present themselves in many forms, and no two struggling students are alike. They may manifest themselves either as with emotional paralysis or learned helplessness, general apathy towards towards new learning, or the messenger itself, the teacher, and may present disruptive behaviors that come with high cost. So educators need practical solutions that are realistic and easy to implement, so they can reduce the classroom chaos and prevent the power struggle they sometimes encounter when dealing with challenging students. But we may have misled ourselves that all these strategies are student-directed. We do want students to heighten their motivation and take personal responsibility and engage in cooperative behaviors, but maybe the teachers can model it. And maybe for some students, the teacher may be the only role model that they ever have in their lives. So MaryAnn has created this extensive resource handbooks, that are filled with practical ideas and everyday classroom needs that I think can be very helpful in understanding the way the teacher can change herself. And I do think another comment I wanted to quickly make, that if the teacher changes herself, the world around her is going to get better. And just like, the golden truth about self-improvement, when you change, the world appears better. And because you have changed, the world finds the motivation to make changes to themselves. So her family life will improve. Her, friendship circle will improve. I'm pretty certain of that.
Well, I think you're right. But we've talked a lot on this show, Sucheta, about how just teaching can be very stressful. But let's just be honest here. Existing on this planet can also be stressful. So I suppose a teacher has that added burden to minding their inner emotional state, right?
You're absolutely such a beautiful question, and I think that's why I wanted to bring it back to that executive function. That's what we are trying to demystify here. An educational and learning context, we are trying to elevate students' capacity to self-direct and self-guide. And that, the very important part of that, is emotionally manage themselves. So in order to facilitate that, the teacher has to do the same. We have heard that as an adult, we should responding to a situation is far better than reacting. Then why do we react? In my opinion, we react because we are distracted, we are stressed, and we are overcommitted. And it's just not alone, limited to a teacher, but every adult that I know, or everyone, as you mentioned, living life is stressful. So one of the reasons we will not be responding and simply reacting is because we are distracted, stressed, and overcommitted. So what are we distracted by? We are distracted by technology. We are distracted by the thoughts that consume us about unattained goals, and our own, mind wandering can be distracting, which is unmonitored. When your mind wandering is left unchecked, that can be distracting, right? So at the heart of then talking about stress. So at the heart of stress, we are fighting the truth in the present reality. So what I mean by that we are wishing for a different outcome or better results or magical disappearance of unpleasantness caused by people or circumstances. And that probably is the primary root cause of stress. So the chaos inside can easily translate into the chaos outside, or the chaos outside can add to the chaos inside. As Wayne Dyer, motivational speaker, has said, that the state of your life is nothing more than a reflection of state of your mind. So to respond and to not react, we need to get off the autopilot, rein in your emotions, particularly the stress, and take a perspective on the needs of others. So, in order to kind of do that, I feel we need some strategies. And MaryAnn, she didn't talk about this in this podcast, but I thought it was very appropriate to mention this here. It's a great resource that people can look up in her book. She talks about E plus P plus ST equals F. So what does that mean? E means event, plus P means perception, which come from your past experience, plus ST, which is self-talk, or their lack thereof, equals to feelings, which is the F. So the idea here is to change your feelings. In order to change your feelings, you need to have something done differently about your perceptions and self-talk, because we can't change really events. So once you change your feelings, you certainly can change your outcomes. So the idea here is to gain control over your perceptions and the conversation you have with yourself. And that's the secret of a very, sound inner life.
Great stuff. I mean, taking everything we've said so far, simple question. Do you think it takes an awful lot to get through to a child?
Yes, I do think that. I think life is so complicated. If it's so complicated for adults, it certainly is very complicated for children. And reaching a children is more of an art than science. A student may be discouraged because he has a hard life, or maybe he comes from a broken family or a life of chaos. I work with my private practice. I see families who are very wealthy, but the children have same amount of stress because of many reasons, including disorganized life, because the parents whose children are disorganized have given that genetic gift to them, and they're not running smooth households with great consistency. There's also unreasonable expectations, which heightens the strain that a child feels, and that can create great hard life for the child. And so a child who, for example, has not gotten breakfast, or he got punished for bad behavior, that same bad behavior for which he gets in trouble at school, also he gets in trouble at home. And so not receiving compassionate treatment by his own parents, or not receiving tender loving care. So such child enters the classroom, and the teacher then is trying to reach that child. So teacher may be the person who elevates the child as she tills the emotional soil of this child with great attention and careful redirection. There are some nuggets of gold for all of us to follow when dealing with children. So one of the things that I think the message that we heard MaryAnn talk about is that as a teacher, she must send feelers out to see if the child is how is the child feeling, and can her own reaction and responses be tailored to a child's emotional undertones in that conversation. So maybe in order to do that, the teacher needs to exercise some fundamental human tricks. What are they? Be patient and be demonstrative of that patience. Be considerate and be demonstrative of that consideration. Offer helpful suggestions. Treat the child with great respect and make encouraging comments, as MaryAnn talked about. Show caring by keeping engaging the student at the center of every activity. There are wonderful suggestions that she was talking about that, I cannot imagine this happening. I think teachers forget that a high schooler is a child. We forget a tall, a tall 6 foot tall boy with peach fuzz on his face doesn't feel like he's a child, but yes, he is. So celebrating their birthdays, having lunch with a kid, or having a tea, afternoon tea, kind of pretend tea. You can imagine you're a queen of England or something, but calling the kid in the evening at home just to check on the kid, particularly the kid if he has had hard time in the class, sending a note to the parent praising the child. These are kind of simple gestures that can do wonders for the child's psychology. I feel these are simple tricks about how to treat others with utmost humanity. What we want for ourselves is exactly what students want for them. And so it's the teacher's job, to offer that to the students. So one last thing that comes to my mind about this is the teacher needs to do everything possible to fill her own bucket from somewhere else before standing in front of the students. We as adults owe it to our children.
Well, yeah, Great stuff. I mean, I'm thinking about a lot here, but it's not just about feelings, right? It's not just emotions or dealing with all of this. I mean, I suspect there are some actual tactical methods that can also help a teacher set the stage for success with a student and a child. Yes?
Oh, absolutely. And again, I'm going to refer to some of the writings that MaryAnn has done, and I highly suggest for our educators or parents who are listening to this podcast to explore them. But yes, it's tactical methods that need to be also instilled in the classroom teaching. Consistency and predictability are two anchors that stabilize child's emotional well-being. An organized classroom where the processes are self-evident and well-rehearsed can really help the student get grounded. Collective common expectations and well-stated kind of expectations can really help the child to know how to comply and meet those intangible, invisible expectations once they become transparent. Sometimes an organized class may be the only respite for a kid who comes from chaotic homes, as I mentioned earlier. So in their book, MaryAnn and her colleague Alicia Duncan, discuss 5-step process to teach procedures. They say step 1 is to explain the procedure. Step 2 is to model it, which is to visually demonstrate the procedure itself. Step 3 is to role play. So engaging with the student and kind of having a couple of students come in and give instruction. One becomes the teacher, the second acts out as a student. Another thing they describe, which is kind of find the flaw method, which is actually the teacher instructs the student to run into a glitch while implementing the solution or the procedure. Number 4 is to practice. So giving to all students an opportunity to exercise that procedure in number of times before kind of expecting that to be upheld. And finally, she mentions that a review should be an integral part of that. So review is what? When a student actually fails to comply with the procedure or forgets. So maybe after a weekend is over, the teacher should review the procedures. When the students come back from Christmas break, teachers should review the procedures. So classroom management skills are of great importance, and they contribute to the teaching success. If the teacher allocates adequate time necessary for the student to inculcate these new procedures, it can pay off in the long run.
Great stuff. All right. Well, we're nearing the end, Sucheta. Any closing thoughts you'd like to share, please?
Yeah, all of these conversations that I'm having as I sit here and think about how to make children self-sufficient and how to promote their executive function, which is nothing but self-regulation, self-observation, cooperative social engagement. What comes to my mind is a teacher's role is that of a gardener. The teacher needs to take her job seriously. They need to be kind to the kids and constantly be reminded that they're only kids. Even if you have an 18-year-old in your class, he is still a kid. And that kind of level of deep empathy we must feel for our children. Executive function skills blossom when there is just enough change that forces adaptive processes to be engaged. But that change is only evident if there is something stable and something that anchors, such as organized systems that have been consistently implemented. So it's teachers' kind of role and responsibility to anchor the student with something that's stable and consistent. Finally, the way teacher treats the student sets the tone for the students as to how much he matters in the world. So we have the ability to help alter child's perception and inner self-talk. So he can, if he thinks, we think he can. So I think that's what I kind of want everybody to take away from my conversation with MaryAnn today.
All right. Great stuff. That's all the time we have for today. On behalf of our host, Sucheta Kamath, and all of us at Cerebral Matters, thank you for listening today. We look forward to seeing you again right here next week on Full PreFrontal.
Thank you for listening to Full PreFrontal, exposing the mysteries of executive functions. To contact our host, Sucheta Kamath, and learn more about her work on improving executive functions, visit her website at cerebralmatters.com. That's cerebralmatters.com. Tune in next week for the next informative episode of Full PreFrontal.